Good morning, everyone here and also on Zoom. I'd like to welcome you to the last Adventures in Living for this year. We thank everybody who's participated and would encourage any one of you out there who is listening to come forward and let our team know that you would be interested in doing a presentation next year. It's so gratifying. It's wonderful, especially for us new people, to know what you all have done in your life experience. So I encourage you to contact, we have a great team. It's Dick Martin who does the recording, and he makes it very simple for you. And Diane Haynes, who is on Zoom today. Hello, Diane. And of course, Julianne, who we couldn't work without. So we thank everybody on the team. I hadn't met Fred Harden but from the introduction he sent me, he's had an Indiana Jones life, I swear. He sent me a few words. He says, Pat and I moved to Oak Hammock in 2005 from Sanford, where we had 4+ acres on the Wekiva River. I enjoyed all of my work sites, only leaving when the challenge went away, or for more money. The special time was with GE and the space program. It had a special purpose, getting our man on the moon. We worked long hours without complaint. The mosquito study was exciting and also dangerous. I learned to fly a small seaplane into areas where no one had been before. Of course, 26-year-olds have no fear. My Disney time would take pages. I did learn to drive through deep snow for the first time and to climb on mountains as high as the High Sierra as 9,100 feet. Remember, I'm a native Floridian who did not see snow until I was 20, and that was when I was on active duty in Denmark. So if this doesn't sound like Indiana Jones, I don't know what does. So please, we'll start with Fred Harden's video, and we thank him.
Good morning, and hello, Zoom. This was done in 2014, so it's 8 years old. Remember, I looked different then. Maybe. Any case, Julie and Dick really made this thing possible. I really appreciate their help. So we'll start now, I guess.
Okay.
Good morning. You hear me all right in the back? Good. To start off, I'll tell you how this is going to go. Since I'm an only child, there will be discussions about family ties in the beginning and again at the end. The balance will be a series of adventures of my life, which I hope you'll enjoy. First slide is of my early family. My father's father, John Harden, spelled H-A-R-D-I-N, by the way. His sister, Jenny, and his mother, Louisa Drew Harden. John was born in 1860, and she was born in 1864, all in Iowa. The next slide is 1910. This shows John Harden on the left, my father and Joe Harden, named Joseph, but I say Joe, born in 1903, and his mother, Louisa. She died in 1911. John Harden was 7 feet 1 inches tall. Both he and Louisa were Scotch-Irish, of course. John was a Baptist minister who served the poor in Des Moines, Iowa, and died in 1915 from TB he contracted while working with the poor. My father had to quit school so he could work to be able to buy his father's meds. After his father died, the pharmacist who provided the meds, Fred Chapman, adopted him. Since the Harden family was quite well off, but for some reason would not help his father, I guess he was a black sheep, my father changed his name from H-A-R-D-I-N to H-A-R-D-E-N. Big change. Next slide is my mother's mother, Anna Williams, who was born in Wales, 1877. Came to the United States in 1891. She moved to Iowa, and the rest of her family went to Saskatchewan, Canada. She later married Litany Webb, who was born in Missouri in 1875, and they moved to central Iowa. This is my mother, Gladys Webb at age 19. She was born in Rolfe, Iowa in 1905. She and my father were both raised in Des Moines, Iowa. This is my father, Joe Harden, age 21, born in 1903 in Des Moines, Iowa. They were married in 1925, didn't take long, did it? Shortly after that, all the clans, the Hardens, the Webbs, and the Chapmans, all moved to Miami, Florida in the same year, a mass migration south. I won't go into the reason why, but you can imagine. I finally show up on July 17, 1930 in Miami, Florida, pronounced Miami, by the way. This is a year-old photograph. 1933, I'm in a sailor outfit, destined to be in the Navy, I guess. 1934, while visiting a family farm in Iowa, I was on got with a family collie who adopted me right away. I always loved dogs, and they loved me back. So he and I got lost in the cornfield, and he stayed with me until we were found. 1935, here I am all dressed up in a white jacket, tie, and hanky in my coat pocket. However, this was the year I contacted dengue fever, the last outbreak in Florida till recently. That year, we moved to West Palm Beach, Florida, where my dad took over the Goodyear tire store as manager, and my mother became a secretary for the local Chamber of Commerce. Both my parents worked, so I tended to be sort of independent. 1932-33, all my family fished a lot. This was at Marco Island on the Gulf. Dad with a friend who was, I think, drinking a Coca-Cola. Noticed my dad wearing a tie. They fished with ties on those days. My mother on the same trip. Notice she caught the largest fish. They were all snook. 1938, West Palm Beach, Dad caught a sailfish with Mother and I watching. I'm barefoot, as most South Florida boys did in those days, except I'm cropped out there. 1939, a group photo. My dad's Goodyear West Palm Beach store led the nation in sales, giving us all a free trip to the 1939 World's Fair. I remember going to a baseball game, but I can't remember who played. 1943, gun patch. I took an NRA gun safety course at age 13, was rated as a sharpshooter. Later in 1944, I was on the Palm Beach Gun Club's rifle team at age 14 and rated by NRA as an expert rifleman. The average age of the rest of the team was over 45 years old. But it was a great learning experience for me in all kinds of ways, especially for self-confidence and being almost an equal to the rest of the team. My average score was 195 out of 200 at 100 yards. 1944, team photo. Northborough Junior High in West Palm Beach, we were the city championship in football. I'm the little guy at number 14 in the front row. Here I am, a pulling guard on the Palm Beach High School championship football team, all 165 pounds. That was the same year I enlisted in the active Naval Reserve while in high school. Was able to take a 2-week Navy cruise to Puerto Rico in a small subcaser while I was still in high school, which was an experience. 46, 47, a swamp buggy. You may not know what those things are. It was similar to one I had, with big tires and 2-wheel drive. We were out in the real swampy country west of West Palm Beach before there was any drainage. The water was probably 2 feet deep. Now it's all developed. Everything I knew and loved then is now gone and paved over. Most of South Florida is already. This slide is the class photograph. Graduation. Palm Beach High School, graduating class of 303. I'm on the top row, the fourth from the left on the top. We lost many of these men in my class to the Korean and Vietnam War. 1948-49 in Miami, the car. On the left is my mother's father, Litany Webb, my dog Chips. In the background, my 1929 Ford Model A underslung hot rod. No doors, no windshield, no fenders, or seat belts. But it had a souped-up engine. I did have a pair of old Packard headlights, if you'll notice. I don't know how I survived that period in my lifetime. Here I am in my dress blues. I guess those watch hats went away a good number of years ago, I think. From 1948 to 51, I would work as a field tech, or a grunt, you could say, for the Florida State Board of Health and the U.S. Department of Agriculture Sandfly Research Lab at Fort Pierce and again at North Miami Beach. As a result of the Korean War, I was called up for active duty as a quartermaster in 1951 and assigned to the destroyer in Norfolk, Virginia, the Willard Keith DD-775, part of the 6th Fleet. This photograph is in Trieste. I think it was a free city then, 1951. It's part of Italy now. There's a view from the stern. The hatch in front of me is my special sea detail and general quarter station. If the ship loses the bridge or power, I'm to steer facing the stern in a very small compartment with 2 sailors cranking the gears to move the ship's rudder manually. My station was normally on the bridge, keeping the ship's log, assisting with navigation, signaling, and chart plotting. We were always short of officers, so many times I might be an unofficial junior officer to deck on the bridge when underway, especially between 12 and 4 in the morning. Those situations, you learn about duty, responsibility, and teamwork. This was Liberty in Naples, Italy. In Naples, with the locals who didn't even know I was there because of all the visiting sailors were so common. Following that Liberty, we were caught in a hurricane on the Bay of Biscay, south of England, in which we experienced 40 to 60-foot waves and rolled 55 degrees in each way, right and left, port and starboard. Fortunately, I don't get seasick, but sometimes the only person on watch who was still standing. The storm sank a large number of French fishing boats. Right after the storm, we had to stand by a freighter called the Flying Enterprise, you may recall that, till she sank while under tow. As a result of the heavy seas and high winds, we took some serious damage topside. This was Christmas Day, 1951, on board the Keith with German war orphans in Bremerhaven, Germany. It was a happy but sad time for all. Much of the city was still in ruins from World War II bombings. In those Cold War days, we were on a goodwill tour of Europe, all the way up to the Baltic Sea off of Poland. But our real mission was to locate Russian radar stations and measure their range. And of course, the Russians knew exactly what we were doing. So did most people in the ports. This is a photo of 1955-56 of our student pest control class. We did all the pest control at the University of Florida. As he said, I was discharged in 1952 and enrolled at Palm Beach Junior College right away. And transferred to the University of Florida in 1953. I went to Ag College, majored in entomology with a minor in business administration. The photo is of our student pest control team at UF. Many of us were on the GI Bill at the time. I graduated in August 1955 on a fast-track system, taking 18 to 21 hours a semester and 9 in summer school. So I got out in 3 years. All was not studying. We did fish Lake Santa Fe for speckled perch. But we forgot somebody has to clean those things late into the night. It was fun, but a break from studying. Some of my semesters I was in class 45 hours a week to do all the labs. This is a map of South Florida, including the Everglades National Park. I was hired right away by the State Board of Health because they wanted me to do that job while I was in school, so I knew I had a job when I got out. I was assigned to Miami, Florida as a regional entomologist to do a salt marsh mosquito migration study involving most of South Florida, from Miami over to almost Naples, and also monitored the 3 county mosquito control districts and worked with the Assistant Attorney General to catch illegal pest control operators, mostly through entrapment, which works, but it's illegal now, I guess. 1955-56, this is our little plane flying over the Everglades Park, carrying out a mosquito migration study which involved flying a Piper J3 Cub with a souped-up engine, flying coast to coast twice a week for 10 hours each flight. I got several hundred hours dual time during this trip. Purpose of the study was to determine mosquito larvae and adult densities in an effort to determine if salt marsh mosquitoes could fly from the Everglades National Park 40 miles in the greater Miami with the right weather conditions, which we did and published my first scientific paper in 1960. It was fun. The pilot let me do most of the flying, which was mostly low-level bush flying and laying in some difficult situations like small lakes and rivers. You know, when you're 26, you can do almost anything. The only thing that was difficult, we had to take the battery out because it weighed too much, so we didn't have any lights if we had to fly at night. And to prop the engine, you had to sit on the floats and prop like this on the inside instead of on the outside, which was not my favorite thing to do. I let the pilot do that. Here I'm exiting the float plane on one of our stations to check the rainfall. Take a 1-minute landing rate count. At one station on the west coast, I counted an estimated 300 mosquitoes laying on the front of the trousers in the first 10 seconds. Then I ran to the plane. I had on a B-veil, gloves, long-sleeve shirt, but no repellent. I hollered to the pilot to shut the door, and I grabbed the wing struts and stood on the float till he taxied out and blew all the mosquitoes off me so they wouldn't go back in the airplane with me. I'm glad we had the door on, because on most flights we removed it so we had better vision and better access. But it's interesting when you fly and you look over and there's nothing between you and the ground when you bank around like this. Here I am. I took the job as the new director at St. Lucie County Mosquito Control District, Fort Pierce, in 1956. The county attorney and I were the only college graduates on the payroll. I had to attend every county commission meeting for 8 years, until 1964. A real course in political science, especially before the Law in the Sunshine. I was rehired every January 1st, and they rehired all my employees. Here we are barging a drag line out to a salt marsh island to construct impoundments. A bit of a hairy operation, at least for me. Salt marsh mosquitoes and sandflies cannot lay their eggs on water, only on damp soil. So water is left to fluctuate in the fall and winter, but covers the marsh during the spring and summer. As a result, we built levees around the perimeter of the marsh so we'd be able to control the water level. Problem. During World War II, the SEALs, now they were called frogmen then, had training that left all kinds of ordnance, landmines, hand grenades, and whatever, everywhere, especially along the edge of the marsh, so we had to stop our dragline work. We brought in the former base commander to Fort Pierce for a conference. He felt all was safe, question mark, question mark, question mark. So we insured our dragline personnel for $300,000 each. That was in 1960 or so, that's a lot of money, and went back to work. Here's an aerial photograph of the dragline constructing a levee on the edge of the Indian River. We left the vegetated fringe to protect the levee from wave action. Here I am viewing a small pump discharge. You notice I didn't wear a coat and tie out in the swamp, but this is another photo op. We used a 12-inch pump that you see here and a 30-inch diameter portable pump to maintain water levels, supplemented by 30-inch diameter tide gates. All these kinds of equipment were designed and built in our shop, sort of a shade tree engineering operation. We had no engineer on staff, and the county didn't either, so we were it. This was another one of our shade tree engineering success stories. We built a 30-inch diameter portable pump with a diesel engine using belt drive. It would pump an acre-inch per minute, or about 25 to 30,000 gallons a minute. This is an airboat unloading. We built this from scratch, a 21-foot airboat with a 235 horsepower aircraft engine. It was used to service the drag lines in inaccessible areas with water access, and also used to fog for mosquito control along the shorelines. It helped to have some ex-boat builders and machinists on our payroll. Here we are loading the 30-inch culvert pipe into an airboat, a little bit of a tight fit. It was often used for installation. This was used for installation of a tide gate which put through the levee. We experimented with aerial fogging using a World War II Stearman aircraft to reach areas that didn't have any road access along the river. But it was only successful with little or no wind. This special sign on the levee, an attempt to reduce vandals from disturbing our tide gates, which were especially counterbalanced with weights, they could try to prop the gate open to increase the flow out of the marsh in order to attract fish. The sign really did help the problem. When I asked the county sheriff for help, he said, "Raise your right hand." He made me a special deputy. He said, "Handle it." Can you read that at all in the back? Good. The cost $26, I think made a shock for some folks. It'd probably be $126 now. This is a photo of a tide gate letting a high tide push salt water into the marsh. Once the tide shifted towards low tide, the gate automatically closed shut. This was a key to the proper balance, counterbalance of weights on the steel arms. Another shade tree operation. Of course, at the beginning, the state said it wouldn't work. Then when we got it to work, they said it was their idea. But anyway. This is the Key West Airport. We took time off to take a private airplane trip to Honduras and Guatemala in 1958 with friends to view Mayan Indian temples, many still uncleared. We said goodbye to the Key West Airport on our way across the Gulf of Mexico, which in retrospect was a little scary because it's a long flight and you're a little small airplane. This is Belize, Honduras Airport. We initially landed at the wrong airport in San Pedro Sula, the official point of entry. Both airports, one for a crop duster and one the main airport, had red tile roofs. Kind of hard to tell them apart. Since it was the first time any of us had ever been there. The San Pedro Airport people said, "No problem." Immigration wasn't worried. They just thought we'd crashed. We checked in as crew. That's a good way to travel when you can do that. Flew on to British Honduras, which is now known as Belize, which is that airport. Then we flew on to Copan, Honduras, which is well inland in Honduras. In that part of the world at that time, there were no reliable navigational aids. You had to fly by the seat of your pants, using dead reckoning, what maps were available, and some verbal discussions. Following rivers, moving between mountains, and so forth. This is the unpaved runway at Copan. They use the word airport is kind of a hard thing. In fact, there was nobody there, and we had to walk into town with our luggage. We found out later the runway was 1,000 feet shorter than it was on the map, which made for an interesting takeoff a few days later. I always sat in the co-pilot seat. This is our airplane. And we took off, and the pilot says, now, when I say you pull the gear up. So we got the gear up, we went through the fence on the runway. So we said, we won't come back here again. This is our aircraft, the Piper Apache twin engine. We carried the 4 of us on this great adventure. No communications back to the States for 10 days. No electrician in town, no doors, only curtains on our doors. A soldier on the street wore a World War I uniform. But trying to order breakfast was the highlight of the day for the restaurant staff. For I did not speak very good English, and they didn't Spanish. They didn't speak English. Whatever I ordered caused them to break into hysterical laughter. I never know what I said, but they brought me some breakfast anyway. This is a Mayan temple and courtyard. Most of these were built between 500 and 1000 AD. And for some reason, the whole population just left. They think it was either from warfare or drought or lack of food or revolution, who knows. This is Tikal, Guatemala airstrip. I said, my God, with a narrow airstrip. My job is in the co-pilot seat was to prop the door open so when the landing gear touched down, the door acted as an air brake so we could stop before we reached the end of the airstrip. There were no roads there at that time. The only way in was by airplane. We slept in the same buildings as the archaeologists, no screens, thatched roof, but very good food. Here I am in a typical pose prior to leaving for Belize and home. I must point out we never drank any water, only wine, beer, and cold drinks, warm. I had an ice cube in a hotel at Belize and got sick. Remember, germs only live in water. After I left St. Louis County and went to Mississippi. This is a map depicting the Mississippi Test Facility. You see the dark green? And around it is a 100,000-acre buffer zone. New Orleans is off in the lower corner and Gulfport's over on the right. 1964, I was a mosquito control consultant for General Electric Company's Missile and Space Division at Mississippi Tech Facility at Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, where they were the site manager. After my recommendations, they decided to hire me and gave me a 5-year contract. But after 2 months on the job, NASA said, we haven't approved his position yet. So I gave a good job, maybe I don't have one. As a result, I had to go to Washington, D.C. to plead my case to Dr. Werner von Braun and his mostly German staff. I got there with a 30-minute talk, and they said, you do it in 15. Well, we took 45 minutes, and they approved my position. But after that, I'm intimidated by nobody. 64 to 70, here I'm at my desk. My task was to provide 24/7 mosquito control for that 12,000-acre test area you saw in dark green, and monitor the 100,000-acre buffer zone. Also to set up a cooperative control effort for the 3 coastal Mississippi counties, because that's where a lot of our residents, our workers live, and develop an effort to have an election in the neighboring Louisiana parish, they call them parishes instead of counties, St. Tammany, to create a mosquito control district with a 5 mil tax. In 65, I should say, I was fortunate to be inducted in the GE's 1 in 1,000 club, where the company picks one manager out of 1,000 for that award. This slide shows the Saturn I booster stage being lifted into the test stand for static firing tests. They're the reason for the 100,000-acre buffer zone, because the firing of that stage would probably knock down some buildings within that zone. There's a truck trap. Besides doing the typical type of mosquito surveillance using like light traps and those Lannery counts I used in the Everglades, we used a new system called a truck trap, pictured here. When this is driven down the road at dusk, it would collect flying mosquitoes in the front, be collected and woven in a nylon net at the back of the trap. This would give us some good idea of what mosquitoes were becoming active and if they were headed our way or not. Snake control. This is a red rat snake. One of our tasks was the removal of snakes from buildings, cars, and other critical areas during test firing. Mississippi Test was a haven for snakes. I gave snake lectures to Boy Scout groups and to new employees, new and old, if they were a 10, because I used live and dead snakes, so not everybody showed up. There's a helicopter. A local mosquito control guy from Harrison County showed up, and my NASA counterpart and I were about to do an aerial inspection on site of the marsh to see what the situation for flooding was. Some other task, by the way, was the manager of grounds and buildings maintenance and the relocation of employees and their furniture and support gear, without computers, by the way. At the drag line, NASA and the local county commissioners and I are agreeing to a transfer of a drag line to construct mosquito-controlled ditches in the high marsh in that county, which would benefit us up at the test site in the long run. This is Fight the Bite, our local model in promoting the passing of a 5 mil tax election to fund a proposed mosquito control district in St. Tammany, which is located on the western boundary of the test site, and where many of our employees lived, including me. It passed by a 90% margin. Can you imagine that happening in Florida? As I left MTF to take a position at Walt Disney World, the GE photographers got a little bit carried away. GE was good to me, but I had to bail out due to the cutback to NASA activities. I could see the handwriting on the wall, but it was a very difficult position because I had a good slot with that company. But it wasn't a $50 million fog machine, $51 million. Walt Disney, this is about 1969-70. This is a view of the Magic Kingdom under construction. Next slide is the Seven Seas Lagoon under construction. The basement of the Magic Kingdom was built first. Then the excavation of the Seven Seas Lagoon was put on top. Then they put the Magic Kingdom on top of that. That's why they had that basement to deliver everything underneath the facility. Here I am in the Reedy Creek lab. When I went there at Reedy Creek District as entomologist for a mosquito control program, then I got appointed as the pollution control officer because they fired the pollution officer. I was the only one who had been to a meeting. That was my qualification. Then I was manager of RCI Water Quality Lab, which you see here. This is a typical corporate photo op. They did that a lot. I was then transferred to Walt Disney World to head up a newly formed Environmental Protection Department, but I also kept the position as pollution control officer at Reedy Creek. Later on, I had business cards for Reedy Creek, Walt Disney World, and Walt Disney Productions, depending where I was. Here I'm looking at birds, as a good birder should always do. I really became a serious birder, became the president of the Orange Audubon Society in Orlando with 1,500 members, and created the Wekiva River Christmas Bird Count, and was a compiler for 12 years. And I've previously been involved with the Nature Conservancy since 1959, when I chaired the first committee of 12 people. We had $25. Now they have 20,000 members in Florida alone. Here I am at the beach in Melbourne Beach. Disney owned a mile of land on Melbourne Beach, ocean to river. We did an environmental study, did elevations, plant IDs, birds, sea turtle studies, the whole thing, and found out it had one of the most dense loggerhead nesting sites on the east coast of the United States. We did not recommend that Disney be developed that property, and it was finally transferred to the Brevard County Parks and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service at a low-cost figure. But the president of Walt Disney World Company liked the beach study, so he said, "Fred, I want your group to go out to California and do a study on a potential Disney ski resort in the High Sierra." We call each other by our first name, by the way. I said, "Card, we're flatlanders. We don't know squat about snow and mountains." He said, "You didn't hear what I said." So off to California to do a study part-time, 2 weeks there, 3 weeks back and forth, red eye special. This was the entrance road to the proposed Disney Independence Lake ski resort. Pretty rough country. It covered 35,000 acres, well north of the Donner Pass, where all those people died of snow, and Truckee, California. Elevation 6,000 to 9,100 feet, a big change from flat Florida. And nobody lived there. That's how bad it was. Well, good, but it was wilderness area. Here I am in a meadow at the site in the summer, where in the winter the snow was 20 feet deep on the level. That's where we learned to drive a snowmobile. I can always use that in Florida, Here the cars are covered with snow. Beautiful country. We did 53 miles of vegetation transects with data every 300 feet. Up some steep slopes, using maps, color ID, an altimeter, and a compass, which wasn't very good because of all the variation in the soil there. Deviation, I should say. There were some survey flags for potential ski runs, but not much else. Several miles to the nearest hard road, no phones, no radio. In the winter, we had snowfall of 8 feet in 5 days. That's when I learned to drive in the snow. This is a view of one of us going up a steep grade. We all learned about mountain climbing hands-on, with some professional help from Sierra Pacific Land Company, who was a partner in the project, and the U.S. Forest Service staff. They and Sierra Pacific and the Forest Service owned all the land there in the project. This is Pat at 8,500 feet overlooking Lake Independence in the summer. But in July, it snowed that high. Yes, we took snow water sampling in the mid-winter. Nutrients came down with the snow, sourced with dry country nutrients in California agriculture areas, blown with the mountains as dust, and then came down as snow. We were trying to establish a baseline to find out if we contaminated anything, it was us, not something else. This is a view from a cave overlooking the lake. It was the site of a C-47 airplane crash in 1947. Small parts of the plane were still there 25 years later. This is the midwinter staff meeting, not typical though, in a little bar and hotel up in Sierraville, north of the project. Managed PJ is the president of Walt Disney World. We woke him up sound asleep at 2 a.m., so he came down to party with us. We were a fun company. Everyone went by their first names, and the impossible just took a bit longer to accomplish. And of course, after 3 years, management decided not to do it, but do Epcot instead. So I inherited the job of getting all the state and federal construction permits for Epcot to open in 1981. While we're in California, we visited my cousin, the Western movie actor Hank Warden. He was in many of John Wayne's films. He was a preacher in the Alamo and many other films. And he and Wayne started in films together and did films also with Ward Bond. Hank always played strange, dummy kind of character, but he had a master's degree from the University of Nevada. You do what makes money, I guess. After the project, we still liked the West. So we traveled out there and camped a lot in Texas, New Mexico, and especially Arizona. Almost were all birding trips with our pickup truck and pop-up camper. Notice no air conditioning. Grand Canyon, 1983-85. We loved the south side of the Grand Canyon. A camera could not do it justice. You've probably seen 1,000 photographs of the Grand Canyon, but the photographs never tell you what it really looks like when you're there. Then we visited the largest national park in the lower 48, Big Bend National Park in Texas. The people who managed to live out there in the frontier days had a tough time. They had to be mean folks and good folks and tough folks. It's real desert country, dry and beautiful, but good birding. New Mexico, Montezuma's Well, a long abandoned Indian site. It is thought that many of these Indian sites were abandoned due to a long drought of between 100 and 200 years long. And you wonder if California is about to experience that. Back to Florida. Walt Disney World. We were involved in development of a comprehensive plan for Reedy Creek Improvement District. By the way, that was the local government the legislature created so they didn't have to deal with the surrounding counties. We used soils as a land use criteria. And during that time, I also picked up the task of developing a tree farm and a cattle operation on the south end of their 27,000 acres. So it helped to have an agricultural degree. This was our home in 1980. We had 4.5 acres of woods and swamps on the Wekiva River west of Sanford. As a result of living there, we were charter members of an environmental group called the Friends of the Wekiva River. The Friends, along with other groups with the state and county support, were able to set aside 70,000 acres of critical land in the Wekiva River Basin, a major habitat for the Florida black bear. Here's a view of the Wekiva River and our dock. Our dead-end road was surrounded by state forest, state park, and state preserve lands. We had no street lights. When it got dark, it was pitch black dark. Wonderful to see stars by, but you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Nearest neighbor was about 600 feet away. We had our own spring, designated by the state as Harden Spring, a really tough life, but it was 71 degrees, too cold for me to swim in. Maybe you people could do that, but I can't. In 1982, I received the Oak Leaf Award from the Nature Conservancy for more than 20 years as a volunteer. As chair of the first committee in 1959, and as past president of the state chapter of the Nature Conservancy. What made it really special for me was the governor, Reuben Askew, presented me with the award. Later, Pat also received the award, and she's been on the board of the Nature Conservancy since 1971 till this year. This is a railroad bridge in New Zealand. In 1991, just prior to my retirement, Pat and I flew to New Zealand to spend 30-plus days touring the country in a small RV. Just us, no tours. That's the way to visit. You live where the natives go and camp where they go. They call it trekking. It's a wonderful country with really friendly people. And it wasn't for family ties, we probably loved to have lived there. But you haven't lived till you try and drive down this road and listen for a train whistle on the other end. New Zealand is a very diverse land with beaches, citrus, deserts, rainforests, Alps that equal Europe, rivers, volcanoes, glaciers, and millions of sheep. This is one of the many waterfalls we saw. This is the type of walking bridge you use to walk across creeks and rivers were fairly common. But some of those were pretty narrow and tended to swing back and forth, so we didn't walk on those. Back in Florida, I ran for office for some strange reason in 1982. I decided to run for Seminole County Commissioner, Sanford, Florida. I ran as a Democrat in a county that was over 60% Republican. Go figure. I limited contributions to $100. My opponent and I ran a clean campaign. I wound up with 45% of the vote. But got 10,000 more votes than President Clinton because a lot of my Republican friends crossed over and told me I was the first and last Democrat they'd ever vote for. It was interesting. All the Republican commissioners and I remained very good friends. After I lost, they appointed me to lots of boards. I don't think that would happen these days. Those days, you still communicated. This is a cartoon. I don't know if you can read it in the back or not, but it says, Fred Hart leading a model canoes over the lake to Fort Millen Park, where he'll make a speech from a pontoon boat and walk to the county service building to qualify as the Democrat candidate for the Seminole County Commission. The other guy says, a Democrat? You're kidding. You learn. One of my really things I love to do was William Bartram. You know, he was America's first native naturalist and one of our heroes, my heroes anyway. I was determined to follow his 1974 sailboat trip up the St. Johns River, visiting his original campsites using my sailboat. This map depicts William Bartram's travels. I only did the St. Johns from Sanford to Jacksonville. He started all the way up in Charleston. This is my sailboat, named Gator, of course, a 1982 22-foot Hunter, which is my home when working on the river. This is an island where Bartram camped and said, quote, I could have walked across the river on the backs of alligators. They were that numerous. In those days, gators were not afraid of man and could become quite aggressive. They came up and stole his food right out from under him, practically. A shell-bound. If you look closely, you can see a white line of snail shells, which is all that left of the Indian mound where Bartram camped. All the shells were hauled away to build road construction in the 1920s. I went ashore and saw many of the same plants that he observed at that place in 1774. Best of all, I saw a small red flower that only grows on shells. It was basically in the same place he saw it when he was there in 1774. And to me, as a budding botanist, it was a really great feeling to do that. Here, a group of us Bartram followers are visiting an old plantation on the river near Hontoon Island, which is east of DeLand, where Bartrams seek refuge from a storm in a plantation, but all the buildings were knocked down, so he had to travel further on to find some refuge. This is my towing dinghy, which I towed behind my sailboat. Following my exploring the Bartram's trip, I decided, again, to sail my sailboat solo from Sanford on the St. Johns up to Jacksonville, then down the inland waterway to Titusville. I traveled 350 miles in 10 days. Don't take a sailboat if you're in a hurry. My dinghy was a way of getting ashore. Let me tell you a funny story about that. About halfway between Titusville and Jacksonville, I needed to take a shower, and I had one of those sun shower things you put out in the sun. Well, the temperature was in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Never got warm enough to take a shower. Finally got up to 70s, so I took the dinghy, went ashore in this little place, and hung it up in the cabbage and took a shower. Came back to the sailboat and fussed around, and I forgot to tie up the dinghy. And I look around, it's floating about across the waterway. Comedy scene. I get up, pull up the anchor, crank up the engine, run behind it with a boat hook trying to grab it. Always check everything and tie it down. This is the view of St. Augustine when I was heading back toward Titusville. The bridge only opens at certain hours. So I anchored off the old Spanish fort, and I watched tourists look at me. Then a shrimp boat and I had a close encounter going through the bridge. He thought he had the right of way. This trip was done in February, which is not much of a smart move on my part because it was cold and we had gale winds once in a while. I say we, that was me, but it was fun. A new adventure, 1992. Pat and I were part of a tropical ecology class, 10-day field trip to Trinidad and Tobago. We stayed in an old monastery, which you see here, up on a mountaintop. Took car trips to see birds, frogs, snakes, and ants. A lot of people on the trip were ant specialists. Our room, no screens, no AC, got up at 5 a.m. when the monks started their chants, I should say.
Recording in progress.
So half the crew was on the ground looking for ants, the rest were looking at binoculars at the top of trees. And flying back, I talked to some woman, she was from there. I said, yeah, we were down here looking at birds and ants. Oh, we heard about you. So I guess our reputation spread for us. This is the reading room next to where we ate. The food was different, but the students would rather go into town to Kentucky Fried Chicken to eat and not mingle with science types, which is really a mistake on their part, I think. We had bunches of great PhDs there. This is one of the many beautiful birds we saw there. I guess we saw at least 80 species of new birds we'd never seen before. The view from our window. Had to be careful. The wooden floor had rotten boards. The first night, Pat's foot went through the floor. Since we were on the second floor, we had to walk around rather gently. Back in Florida, camping in our favorite campsite at Sebastian Inlet State Park, south of Melbourne Beach, on the inlet and only a couple of blocks from the ocean. We then, in 2001, began a 6-month trip by RV to Alaska. 2 months going, 2 months touring, 2 months back, coming back a different route. Had to get back for the first Gator football team game, you know. Going out west, we said, we saw a coyote. He said, you people must be crazy. You're traveling in the wrong time of year, and where are you going again? Then we viewed a restored Indian village, which again, I think was abandoned due to that big drought back in the 1600s. And of course, everyone needs to stop and eat sometime. In California, we stopped to visit the giant redwood tree, General Sherman. It was cold and snowing. We wondered why we were the only people there. The Oregon coast is breathtaking. There's no way to describe the beauty of those black rocks coming out of the beach. And the water is probably 50 degrees. You might put your toe in it, but you wouldn't swim in it. This is the Alaska Highway on a good stretch of road. Then we took a boat ride to get a close look at a glacier. The varied colors in the ice is astounding, but you know, soon that glacier will be gone. This is not so good a road. First dusty, then muddy. You always keep your fuel tank at least half full because it's a long way between gas stations. As a result, by the time we got to Tok, Alaska, our rig was dirty brown, but there weren't many truck wash places that would clean it off, so we looked kind of grungy. This is a view of the Alaskan pipeline is across the Yukon River. Now you wonder what's going to happen if that line ever breaks. Up near the Arctic Circle is the home and store of a very tough Alaskan family. They live there year-round with lots of kids, of course, and they didn't refrigerate. They just dug a deep hole in the ground and put stuff down in permafrost. That kept it cold and frozen. Mount McKinley, known as Denali. Difficult to see most of the time from bad weather. We saw it for 3 days in a row. It makes its own weather. One night, Pat and our grandson, who stayed with us for about a month up there, decided at midnight to go out and see it. I said, you two are crazy. But this is what they saw, the pink Arctic glow, unbelievable. The fact that we could see it for the 4 days, and some people spend 4 years, they never saw it one time. We really were blessed. On our way back, we stopped in Alberta, Canada, and Pat took some time off to read. And I stayed in the RV and ate cookies. We stayed at the glacier, Columbia Glacier in British Columbia. And we walked the glacier and had a big, tired rig that ran you around. And it's just a magnificent scene. But you wonder how much longer it'll be there. maybe another 20 years will be gone. The wildlife tend to stop traffic on the main highway. A family of mountain goats checked us out. And I kept wondering, how do they keep from falling? The same place on the road, but it's mountain sheep saying, we were here first. And then what do you tell a buffalo in the lower 48 when he decides to cross the highway? Quote, whatever you want to do is all right with us. This is Custer's battlefield. Interesting history. You realize lately they've come up with a totally different version of what that last stand was all about on public television. Back home and party time. We had a special party at our house called Flamingo Fling. You had to come dressed in bizarre pink outfits, bring food and drink. We had our friends, neighbors, professional friends, and even politicians show up with food and drink. We furnished the basic food and drinks and ice. Went from 11 in the morning until midnight. The last one we had 150 people show up. I'm glad we had 4.5 acres. But nobody in that 150 people smoked. Can you believe that? This is a couple down the road from in their formal wear. Pat and I are outfits before I grew a beard. You couldn't have one at Disney. You like the hat? Here I'm at a podium. We came to Oak Hammock in 2005. I got involved in the Oak Hammock Natural History Society early on, also FLICRA and art, helped setting up signs on the nature trails and taking golf cart tours on the trails. Got elected to PCA in 2008, chaired housekeeping and health and well-being committees, past president of the Athenaeum Society at the University of Florida. I also helped the bird programs in the Natural History Society. I think that's Betty Archer's back of her head there. I was still, at this time, on the planning board at Reedy Creek after 23 years after retired. I don't understand why, but I'm still there. My sailboat Gator finally died. It was a sad day at Lake Santa Fe. But generously, I gave it to the marine owner. Maybe he could salvage it. We were camping again, same scene, Sebastian Inlet, State Park. Great birding site. Pat's rescuing a seabird that was sick. We think that year the food wasn't there and they were starving to death. It's a beautiful sunset at the inlet. However, it's a bad time for sandflies at dusk. This is a group of terns on the beach, at least 2 species. We probably saw 60 species of birds while we were there. Sometime around 2005-06, I took a first art course. This is a pastel of a scene near Cedar Key from a photograph. This is a modified sunset of Sebastian Inlet using acrylic. This is a swamp scene at Bevan's Arm over here using colored pencil, which is a difficult media. I don't do that anymore. Then we took a trip to North Carolina to Hendersonville. Pat with an R.C. Cola moon pie t-shirt. You remember those things? If you lived in Boston, you probably didn't know what that was, but but in the South we had them. We visited Slippery Rock, North Carolina, but I chickened out. The water was too cold again. After Hurricane Katrina, we volunteered to go to Ocean Springs, Mississippi to assist the Lutheran Church group assisting the homeless survivors and others who were trying to rebuild their homes. We helped feed those families. Pat was some of the leaders in this photograph. Well, this is one of the buildings that knocked on, I'm sorry. Many homes and large buildings were destroyed, as you remember. Pat was some of the volunteers in a huge empty warehouse that was given to them in an effort to feed everybody. All kinds of foods were contributed to this effort. Here are rows of paper food containers waiting to be distributed. Pat was part of that group. My job was important. I used a box cutter to cut up the many cardboard boxes that arrived every day so we recycle them. When we were there, we were just a small bit of over 1,800 volunteers who have been arriving since the first day after the hurricane from every state and many countries. It was a great team effort, and we were proud to be a small part of that. Now we're back to family. This is our daughter Laura at her wedding in North Carolina. This is Pat with our 2 daughters, Patty on the left, Laura on the right. This is daughter Debbie with husband Ray, who is retired fire chief from Reedy Creek. 2 grandsons in the back, Aaron and Austin. This is Patty, our daughter, at her wedding in North Carolina with husband Kevin. He's a Brit. Son David, his wife Paige. Grandson Aaron with wife Serena. My last slide is of our great-grandson, 3 years old, named Levi. His new sister was born 2 weeks ago. This is the end of my presentation of my life, but it's not the end, it's just the beginning. Thank you.
mosquitoes, did you figure out a way to cut down the population of mosquitoes?
Two boards work well. Two pieces of wood. They do have a biological things they can produce out in the marsh that cause the larvae not to complete their life cycle. And they're pretty sure that doesn't affect other systems, but you realize they get resistance pretty quickly to anything. When I went to the St. Lucie County, they were still using DDT, and I found out after about a month they had 1,000-fold resistance to DDT when I got there, because nobody bothered to go out and do surveillance to feel out what the population was. Yes, Walter?
Fred, about the only thing that I can think of that you left out was your and Pat's marvelous ability to find out-of-the-way great places to eat. We've often said you all ought to write a book about country roads and southern cooking, because you know all the places.
You notice I had a photograph of me eating in that program.
Any questions? Should bring your mic.
That was fantastic. Thanks for sharing what you had shared before. In terms of mosquitoes, since you were doing your studies, intense studies in Florida, has there been a change in the species in Florida? More disease, less disease that they're carrying?
There are probably 77 species in Florida and probably 30 or 40 in Alachua County. And I think two or three new species have come in from the Caribbean, from North Florida. We have an Aedes, that's a genus here in Gainesville. There's not in South Florida. So it depends on the habitat. But I think the mosquitoes will be here for a long time after we're gone.
Anyone else?
Any questions on Zoom?
Well, Fred, that was very, very interesting. I think, though, that you should do it over and talk about half as fast.
A local comedian.
You're a comedian, Miss Thomas.
Well, thank you very much.
Hi, Fred. This is Diane from North Carolina right now.
Hold on, Diane. Fred, Diane Haynes is behind you on the screen.
On the screen, hi. I'm in Highlands, North Carolina right now. And a few months ago, I received a newsletter from the Nature Conservancy. And I believe you said you were very involved with them, and so was Pat. And as I opened the newsletter, I'm like, oh my gosh, who's that? It was a picture of Fred and Pat standing near a sign that said the Harden Trail. Could you tell us about the Harden Trail, where it is and how it was named that?
It's south of Disney. Disney helped set aside about 15,000 acres set aside to be develop some wetlands on their property, but you have to mitigate it. And we went down to this, I guess they did that in the early 90s. And this was somewhere in the 2000s. And they decided to name a trail after us. So we went down there, and it was, we'd seen friends we hadn't seen in 50 years. It was just a wonderful experience to do that. But we have a trail. It's not paved, and it gets wet in the summertime. But if you ever get down there, it's Disney's Wilderness Preserve is where it is.
Okay. Maybe we could arrange a field trip from Oak Hammock sometime and then stop at some place to eat that you probably know about.
You may have to bring knee boots, so.
Thank you, Fred. And thank you for doing this again for us. We
My
appreciate
pleasure.
it.
Okay, Fred, we have another question on Zoom here. Go ahead, Rick Gold.
I was really interested in your work with the Reedy Creek Improvement District. And I was wondering if you could talk about what the abolishment of the district means, given that it's being turned over to the counties.
Yes, Disney wanted to do some things that the county building codes wouldn't allow. For instance, they built the Contemporary Hotel, the frame, and built a room somewhere else and plugged them in because they finished the construction. So they had their own county. They paid their own taxes, and they paid taxes to the counties also, equal amount. But they had their own building codes, their own security, our own canal system. Everything a city and a county would have, Disney created for themselves. And it seems to work pretty well for 50 years. But now I think our governor, because our president disagreed with him on abortion, wants to do away with the district. It's strange enough, I'm still on the planning board at Reedy Creek all these years. I guess they want to have somebody who remembers what it was when it was started. But I think it'll be there for a long time. That answer your question? I hope
He's
so.
nodding, yep. I don't know, there's another person here, Pat Harden, if you'd like to unmute.
Who is that?
What would a wife be without a comment, right? I wanted to go back to Diane and the Harden Trail. It was really, Fred, I don't know if he really mentioned it, that you understood. He was a founding member of the Florida chapter. And I was on their board for 40 years, and we were both very active. And that's why we got the trail named for us. And it was quite an honor. And yes, as Diane, you asked, we are planning a trip in December to the Disney Wilderness Preserve. So keep an eye out for it in the transportation book. And that particular time when the trail was dedicated was the 25th anniversary, I think, of the preserve, and it was 2014. So it was an interesting story. That could be a presentation in itself. That's it.
We're gonna hold you to that, Pat, for another presentation.
Uh-oh.
Thank you for joining us. Any other questions? Well, we thank everyone for being here. Again, we thank this whole team of facilitators, and thank you all the participants who are willing to share their adventures in living. Have a good day.